Alright, mythology students. So, like I said in my introduction video, we're just going to be going through the elements of a story and how to tell a effective story. Now, a lot of this information that we're going to be covering here is probably going to be a review for you, as we have covered this earlier on in your educational years. So I know for a fact we covered in 8th grade, however, I didn't teach you guys in 8th grade, so I don't know if you did, but I know we touched on parts of it in 10th grade with To Kill a Mockingbird. So we're just going to briefly go through this, and I'm going to narrate these notes for you. So the elements of telling a story. First of all, every story needs a few things. It needs a plot, which is specific events. It needs a theme, which is a life lesson or a lesson that the character learns in the story. It needs characters, obviously, usually people, and in this case, it's going to be you. It needs a setting, which is a place where it takes place. And it needs some type of conflict, which is a problem that is solved throughout the story. Now, a plot diagram takes or usually includes 5 events. It includes an exposition. That's generally where, and I'll get into more details of this later on, it's generally where the setting is introduced, which is when and where the story takes place, and it also introduces the characters. Generally, right in this area right here, right at the beginning of the rising action, there's some type of conflict that is introduced, some type of problem. And then there are a few minor events that lead up to the climax, which is the most exciting part where the problem or the conflict is solved or taken face on or head on. Then there's the falling action, which are a few events leading to the resolution where the character learns something. Now, just to go into a little bit more detail, the exposition. This is at the beginning of a short story. This is where your characters are introduced, your setting is introduced, and some specific background details or other facts that are necessary to the story are introduced. We then want to talk about the point of view. All of our stories are going to be told from the first person point of view. Okay, this is where the story is told through the main character's eyes. Okay, we're going to be using pronouns such as I, me, we, or us, meaning you are going to be telling the story as if you were there, because I want these stories to be stories about you. After the exposition, we're going to get into the rising action. Okay, now this is all the events that lead to the climax. Now, the most important part of the rising action is that there is some type of conflict introduced, meaning that there is some problem that is presented. And on the next slide, we're going to go through different types of conflicts. All right, there are 4 different types of conflicts. Now, a conflict is a struggle between 2 forces in the story. All right, your conflict should be the main problem, which causes your reader to increase interest, increase suspense, and increase tension. All right, now the 4 types of conflict are character versus character, character versus nature, character versus society, or character versus self. Now, you may have heard of this before as man versus man, man versus nature, man versus society, or man versus self. They're the same thing. In character versus character, it is where 2 different characters simply have a problem. They have a feud against each other. They have a problem with each other. They dislike each other for a specific reason. That is the conflict. In character versus nature, that is where the character has to fight against a specific force of nature, whether that be a storm, a disease, or anything like that. For example, if a character had to deal with a specific plague titled COVID-19, that would be character versus nature. All right, the character has nothing personal against this plague except that it is impacting their life. There is character versus society, where this character fights against the rules of society. This could be something such as discrimination, racism, or a problem with a specific rule in the government. Okay, So this is where there is a specific rule that a character is dealing against or dealing with. And then lastly, there's character versus self. Now this is simply just internal struggles. Usually this is like a moral struggle, like if a character is dealing with the problem of doing the right thing or not, and whether or not it would be in the best interest of themselves or other people to do the right thing. Okay, so they're dealing with an internal struggle throughout this story. So there has to be some type of conflict introduced into the story. Next, the climax, which is the high point. This is the turning point of the story. This is where the character, the main character, for example, you, being the main character in these stories, are going to come to a face-to-face conflict. Okay, you're going to come to your problem or your struggle or the issue that you've been building up to in some type of way, and you're going to hit it head on. The falling action is essentially after the conflict is met head on. It's just the loose ends of the plot being tied up. Okay, generally in the falling action, the conflicts and the climaxes are taken care of. Lastly, there is a resolution where the story comes to an ending. Generally, it's where the theme of the story is introduced. Now, obviously, while you are writing a story or reading a story, it's not going to say, hey, the theme of this story is blank, but it's often implied. So while we are speaking a story or telling a good story, we need to tell our listeners or our audience, hey, you should have learned this from my story. So make sure that you meet that in the story. And then lastly, just to review, the exposition rising actions generally like the beginning of the story, where the climax is the middle towards the end of the story. The falling action resolution is indeed the end of the story. All right, so make sure in the next assignment after you viewed this, you are reading A Retrieved Reformation by O. Henry, and you're able to identify these parts of the story along with simple things such as the theme of the story and the point of view. So let me know if you have any questions, but make sure that when you are presenting your story on Flipgrid, you include an exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Now you shouldn't be saying the exposition is, the rising action is, the climax is, but you should be telling a story that meets all of these 5 elements. Let me know if you have any questions.